Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me today in my attempt to create a civil discourse on a pretty heavy topic. There's a lot of things I want to talk about today, but I'm going to kind of condense it to pro-choice versus pro-life and if/how that has to do with women's autonomy. Before we get into the meat and potatoes, I want to make a couple things blatantly clear, blatantly obvious. The first of which is these are just my opinions. These are the opinions that I have formulated through 19 and a half years of life, through the experiences I personally have gone through, and the experiences and opinions of people close to me. This is my opinion, and I absolutely 100% welcome and encourage civil and respectful discourse in the comment section below. I want you guys to respond. I really want you guys to respond and tell me whether you agree or disagree and really pick apart what I'm putting in front of you right now. My reasoning for talking about this, because I know this is a really heavy topic, I want to reduce stigma, period. I want to open up dialogue for people who have maybe never had the opportunity to share their story. I want honest conversation about this. And honestly, somebody's got to talk about it, so it may as well be me. Okay, now that I have all of that out of the way, let's really just jump in. First things first, I think the most important thing actually I need to address is I'm pro-choice, and pro-choice does not mean pro-abortion at all. Pro-choice is simply the freedom to make the decision for yourself in your individual life and circumstances. If you Google the term pro-choice, the first thing that pops up is advocate for abortion, which is in my opinion not specific enough. Pro-choice people advocate for the legality of abortion so that it is an option if need be. I actually have never met somebody who is pro-abortion. I don't know if those people exist. Well, they certainly exist, but they fall under the category of nihilistic, in my opinion. A pro-abortion person is certainly not your everyday liberal or your everyday pro-choicer. And I certainly can't speak for everybody that's pro-choice, but if you really think about it, nihilism and pro-choice are actually antonyms, not synonyms. Nihilism is the reject of moral principles because of the belief that life is meaningless, that, you hear these things often. The sun's just gonna explode anyway, so who cares? We're all gonna die anyway, so who cares? That's an example of nihilism. In many cases, women who want to get abortions are doing so in an attempt to continue the meaningful path that they are already on. Women who get abortions most likely feel like that is going to be the best decision for their life. I often hear nihilists say things like, why bother? Why bother? Well, the reason a woman would bother to get an abortion is so she can bother to continue the rest of her life in the way that she wants to. So I know that's a weird way of looking at things, but it's just how my brain breaks it down. I think of pro-choice and nihilism as complete antonyms, because being pro-choice is allowing each individual woman to decide the meaningful path for themselves. And nihilism just believes that nothing is meaningful. It's all meaningless. So nihilism, pro-abortion are over here. Pro-choice is over here. Pro-life is somewhere else. So to wrap this up, pro-life is anti-abortion. Pro-abortion is nihilism. Pro-choice is allowing women the opportunity to be autonomous in their own lives, which brings me to my next point. Is the abortion debate also a women's autonomy debate? That's up for debate. In my opinion, yes, abortion is only a women's rights topic, in my opinion. And for those of you that believe that abortion is murder, because that's always brought up when I call this a women's rights topic, I believe calling abortion murder is an extreme oversimplification of things, as well as a manipulation tactic. It's very guilt trippy. It is only intended to shame the person that is either getting an abortion or that is supporting the pro-choice movement. There's no way to call somebody a murderer without it being a manipulation tactic. And I honestly think there's no way to get around that being a manipulation tactic. If you're calling a woman a murderer for getting an abortion, you're most likely doing that to shame her, which is guilt tripping and manipulation. I digress. A fetus is not an autonomous being. A fetus cannot make its own decisions. A fetus cannot live on its own without the mother. A fetus can't talk. Even if a fetus could talk, a fetus can't formulate ideas. Therefore, the decision should fall to the next person, who in this case would be the vessel, aka the mother. The mother is the next entity in line to be making decisions because the fetus cannot make decisions itself. And I personally don't believe that we should put the speculation of an unborn fetus above the concrete fact that the mother is already here and has a brain and has autonomy in her own body. Pro-lifers often say that abortion is not a women's rights issue because fetuses are separate entities. But really, they're connected at the umbilical cord and they are 100% dependent. They're in no way separate. And it's not for you to decide whether each individual woman wants to consider the fetus inside of her a human or a fetus. And every woman has a different opinion, and every woman has a different level of connection to whatever is growing inside of her. This brings me to my next topic, which is the fact that I believe very, very strongly that most pro-life people, and by most I mean pretty much all pro-life people, are not actually pro-life. They are in fact pro-fetus. As difficult for pro-lifers as that might be to hear, you need to ask yourself what you are doing for the lives that are already here, already born. There are so many ways to be pro-life that have absolutely nothing to do with abortion, and if you aren't doing any of those things, then it's not fair to call yourself pro-life. It's only fair to call yourself pro-fetus. For example, if you truly are pro-life, I'm assuming you're prepared to adopt every single child that would have been aborted. I'm also assuming that you're prepared to go into the foster homes and adoption centers for the kids that are already born and adopt all of them too. Or at the very least, find the least funded school you can possibly find and go volunteer to teach at it. Volunteer at an animal shelter or a homeless shelter or a food shelter. And I don't just mean once, I mean every day. You're pro-life, remember? So you really need to be pro-life if that's the title you'd like to name yourself. I'm also assuming that you donate all of your extra money to help all of the lives that need help. Because if you're so pro-life, who are you to hoard all of this money when people are dying, you know? And at that, hopefully you're checking where all of your clothing comes from, your car, your furniture, where all of your technology, everything you own. You better be checking where it's coming from on the off chance that you're supporting a sweatshop or that you're supporting child labor. If you're really pro-life, you need to be pro-life. And unfortunately, you can't be pro-life if you're not pro-all life. In that case, you're only pro-fetus. If you only care about being pro-life when it comes to abortion, you're pro-fetus, not pro-life. If you really, really are pro-life, you must not eat meat, and I'm sure you've never killed a spider in your house either. That might sound extreme, but there are some people out there in this world that actually don't eat meat and have never killed a bug because they consider themselves pro-life, and pro-life means all life. Honestly, there are so many things you can do in your own life that would absolutely be considered pro-life. And like I said, if you're not at least doing most of them, then you have no right to consider yourself pro-life. And the thing is, you're allowed to be pro-fetus, you're allowed to consider yourself pro-fetus, but call it like it is. Don't call yourself pro-life if you're pro-fetus, period. Another way to tell if you're really pro-life or if you're pro-fetus is look at the circumstances of the woman who is considering abortion. Is she in poverty? Is she struggling financially at all? Because if so, she's about to be a lot more broke after the cost of having children. Drug abuse, is there any drugs, alcohol, cigarettes even? Because if the woman is doing drugs or drinking or even smoking cigarettes during pregnancy, That's not going to go very well. And as of right now, there are no laws in America prohibiting that, to my knowledge. If there is, let me know. Personally, I would be in support of a law like that. But as far as I know, there are no enforced laws that prohibit pregnant women from doing drugs, drinking alcohol, or smoking cigarettes. And since that's the case, it's unfortunately very possible, especially if the woman is younger and not ready to give up her life. Even if the baby's father is doing drugs or smoking cigarettes around the pregnant woman, that's still not okay. That's still not a decent place for a child to be born. What about a lack of education or a lack of opportunity for education? We have so many uneducated people here already, not only in America, but everywhere. There are so many things wrong already. Do you really want to bring another baby into a situation where it won't be properly educated, won't be properly taken care of, won't be properly watched, won't be properly brought up? Now, these two things I want to put hand in hand: age and the baby's father walking out. The reason I'm putting these two things together is because, to me, they fit together. Generally speaking, if a younger person gets pregnant, the young baby daddy is not going to want to stick around. He's going to be gone. That happens a lot. And if you look at the stats on single mothers and how successful they are and how successful their children are, it's not good. And I'm not trying to bash single mothers at all. I'm bashing men who walk out on mothers. That's what I'm doing. But since that does happen so often, looking at you men, abortion needs to be an option, because a woman doesn't always want to raise a child alone, especially if she's young, especially if she hasn't lived her life yet at all, or if she's still in high school or even college. And now we'll get to the cliches of, rape and incest, or emergency situations in which the mother or baby might not survive. Plenty of pro-lifers I know will make the exception for things like rape, incest, and threats of death or harm, which is commendable to somebody who is pro-life. But there are also plenty of people, in my experience mostly religious people, who consider themselves pro-life, period, no exceptions, no matter what. To those people, I say, it is under zero circumstances ever okay to allow your religion or your morals to dictate what happens to other people's lives. Period. There's no way around that. You are allowed to have your own set of morals. You are not allowed to forcefully push those onto other people. You are allowed to share your experience and share your opinions, but you can't force anybody to do anything on the basis of your religion or morals. That's not okay. So that is how you can tell whether you are pro-life or pro-fetus. A pro-life person would be taking into account all of the lives that are already here. A pro-life person would be taking into account every single life, period. A pro-fetus person only cares about the life when it is a fetus. And once the baby is born, wash your hands of it. And unfortunately, that happens all of the time because of the examples that I just mentioned, I guess a good question to ask yourself is, what causes the least amount of suffering? And I don't know if everybody would agree that that's the best question to ask, but in my opinion, that's the best question to ask. What causes the least amount of suffering? Sometimes the answer would be giving birth. Other times the answer would be getting an abortion. Sometimes the answer would be adoption. Sometimes there's another answer. But sometimes the answer is abortion. If abortion saves a woman months or years of unnecessary suffering, then that's the right answer for that woman. If you're pro-life, you just really have to take into account the lives that are already here, including the mother and the family of the fetus. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is people who say you could just give the baby up for adoption as if that's a quick, simple fix. There's many reasons why that's not a quick, simple fix. Let's talk about them. It's not like one moment we have a fetus and then 1 second later, up for adoption. There's a whole bunch of months in between that a woman has to deal with. And telling a woman that she shouldn't abort and instead she should just give the baby up for adoption completely disregards not only the 9 months of emotional, physical, and mental trauma, but also actual labor, which for some women is a couple hours. For other women, it could last days. For some women, it's life-threatening, etc. Using adoption as the answer to why women shouldn't get abortions isn't fair, because it disregards the entire 9 months in between the fetus first being created all the way to now the baby being in the adoption home. There's so much stuff that goes on in between those 9 months, and it should not be ignored, and it should not be chalked up to something trivial whatsoever. Labor and pregnancy are traumatizing to your body. Sometimes when I say things like that, I get the response mainly from men, but women's bodies are made to have babies. Women's bodies are made to go through labor. No. Women's bodies are not made to make babies, and women's bodies are not made to go through labor. If that's what we were made to do, that's all we'd ever be able to do. We wouldn't be able to talk, we wouldn't be able to get a job, we wouldn't be able to share our thoughts like I'm sharing mine right now. All we'd ever be able to do is make babies, if that's what we were made for. We're made for whatever we want to be made for, you know? We're made for our own individualistic purposes. Pregnancy is a function that we have also been given. The ability to be pregnant and carry a baby to term is a function that we have been given, but it is not the reason we were made, and it's certainly not what we were made for. So chalk that. Thank you. It's extremely demeaning to say that to a woman, by the way, in case you were wondering. To shrink her entire existence to being made to make babies it's ignorant. It's ignorant. We'll leave it at that. Next topic. Well, actually, same topic. Most women, and again, can never speak for all, but most women would never, ever want to go through 9 months of pregnancy just to give their baby up for adoption. And I don't think that's selfish at all. It's not selfish to make the best decisions for your own life. We as human beings do that every day in a lot of ways. We make the best decisions for our own lives. Sometimes that means discounting other people. Sometimes that means discounting other things. And it's not selfish to do. It's also worth noting that adoption centers and foster homes are absolutely overflowing right now. I mean, really, don't just let this passively go over your head. Really think about the fact that every single day, 18-year-olds are walking out of orphanages as parentless adults with no real education, no real family, no real identity. And of course, there's always going to be the miracle baby, the miracle orphan, the miracle whoever that really does make something great of themselves and puts everyone else to shame. But we shouldn't be basing our laws on the miracle baby. We shouldn't be basing our laws on the exception. We should be basing our laws on the norm. And right now, the norm is that adoption centers are overflowing. Absolutely overflowing, and we don't need to contribute to the problem anymore. And putting a child up for adoption that could have been aborted, that would be contributing to the problem, when instead the problem could have just been solved. Okay, next topic. Something I hear kind of often is this idea that after a woman has an abortion, she falls into this devastating fit of depression accompanied by regret and bitterness. And pro-lifers often use that as a scare tactic to drive women away from getting an abortion. First of all, that's a manipulation tactic. Don't do that. Don't manipulate people. Second of all, I'd say that postpartum depression, which if you don't know is the depression that hits after actually giving birth, postpartum depression is probably just as common, if not more common, than the bouts of depression a woman might get after getting an abortion. This also isn't necessarily something that you can draw parallels on, because it's not guaranteed that the woman is going to regret her decision to get an abortion. Just like it's not guaranteed that a woman is going to be happy with her decision to have a child. Unfortunately, I know a lot of women who love their children dearly, but a part of them wishes they had an abortion. And that's really going to make you resent your kid. That's going to make you resent your child. It's going to make you resent yourself. It's going to make you resent anybody that shamed you for wanting to get an abortion. There's a really good quote from a man named Jordan Peterson, and it says, "Don't let your children do anything that will make you dislike them." And in some cases, unfortunately, being born is the thing that the child does to make the parent not like them. And that's sad. Yes, it's sad, but it's a solvable problem if we keep abortion legal. We don't need any more parents resenting their children. That causes unnecessary suffering. Okay, next topic. Men who want their voices heard on the topic of abortion often say things like, "Why is it only a woman's choice when it takes two to tango? Why is it only a woman's choice when half of the child is the man's?" Have you guys heard of the hashtag that's been trending for a while? Hashtag NoUterusNoOpinion. Remember that because we'll come back to it. First, I want to say, I'm sure you guys have all heard the expression, when you have more responsibility, you get more privilege to accompany it. That's a pretty common expression. We start hearing that expression when we're very young. We all know how it works out when somebody with no responsibility has all the privileges. It makes nobody happy, not even the person with the privileges. In this particular case, when a man and a woman agree to have unprotected sex, this is assuming that the woman is agreeing to unprotected sex, remember? But assuming that the woman and the man both agree to unprotected sex, the woman is agreeing to far more responsibility than the man is. Sorry to be vulgar, but literally all the man is required to do is put his dick in, ejaculate, and pull it back out. And that's where his commitment ends. Point blank, period. The woman signs up for a whole lot more. The woman signs up for the pregnancy scares, the actual pregnancy, the labor, the weight gain, the emotional trauma, the physical and mental trauma, the breastfeeding after the fact, the possible postpartum depression, and countless other things that even a good father could just never understand. And this is assuming that the father is staying, because that brings up a whole nother thing, which is the father doesn't always stay because he's not committed. He doesn't have to. And that's exactly what I mean when I say the woman signs up for way, way, way more responsibility. Therefore, she should have more privilege. And in this case, the responsibility is the pregnancy and everything that comes with it, and the privilege is the ability to dictate what happens with that. Does that make sense? Because I hear all the time, but the baby's 50% the man's, so he gets to make 50% of the decision. No. Yes, the DNA of the fetus is technically, biologically, 50% the man and 50% the woman. But the amount of labor, physical, emotional, and mental labor that the woman is going to have to exert for the next couple of years that a man is not obligated to exert, that's like 95% to 5%. So think about that the next time you want to say pregnancy is a 50-50 thing, because it's not. Sex is a 50-50 thing, DNA is a 50-50 thing, but the rest of it is not. And it's not fair to oversimplify it like that. So now I want to move on to this hashtag, NoUterusNoOpinion. I don't agree with that hashtag whatsoever, because all of what I just said has to do with the final decision. Men do not get to make the final decision. Men are allowed to have an opinion on whatever the hell they want. Men are allowed to have an opinion on absolutely anything. Men are allowed to do whatever they want. But realistically speaking, the ultimate final decision is the woman's. First of all, because it's her body. Second of all, because she's the one that has to deal with all the responsibility of the outcome. So it's her choice. The man can have any opinion that he wants. So I don't like that hashtag, NoUterusNoOpinion. That's not fair. Men are allowed and should be giving their opinions, especially if the man wants to be a dedicated father. He should be allowed to throw his opinion out there, and the woman should consider it if they truly are a team. But he still doesn't get to make the decision for her. He doesn't get to do that. That's not fair, and that's not acceptable. Also, this is really, really just my opinion. It's actually just my guess. and I have no idea if this is true or not, but I think the hashtag NoUterusNoOpinion started because men were attempting to dictate and manipulate women under the facade of having an opinion. As in, they were doing things like calling women murderers or insisting that abortion is wrong, when in reality, that's not an opinion. An opinion sounds like, I'm pro-life because of blah, blah, blah. A judgment sounds like you're a murderer. And there's a huge difference. So although I don't agree with what the hashtag actually says, I agree with the reasoning behind why it was formed. It was formed as kind of a way of saying, men, you don't get to tell us what to do with our own bodies. Sorry, that's just not what you get to do. And I think I already said this, pro-life people, and specifically men, really only seem to be pro-life when they're trying to silence a woman or when they're trying to erase a woman's story. And that's really unfortunate, because if you want to call yourself pro-life, that has a big weight attached to it. And most people just want the title and they don't want the weight. And that's honestly beyond hypocritical. So I also want to say, I know women who have been forced to get an abortion as well as women who have been forced to not get an abortion. And both are equally wrong. That's why I said right at the beginning, what the most important thing about this entire debate is that pro-choice doesn't mean pro-abortion. It's not okay to force a woman to get an abortion because you didn't want to wear a condom, men. Okay? Unfortunately, there are people in my personal life who this has happened to. They were forced into getting an abortion because the man didn't want to wear a condom. And I don't even know what to say about that. I'll just let that sink in with you guys. It's wrong either way. The point of being pro-choice is that it's the woman's choice. I am pro-woman's choice. She gets to decide what happens with her own body and her own life. Nobody gets to force her into having an abortion. Nobody gets to guilt her into going through pregnancy and giving birth. Neither of those things are anywhere near acceptable. And in most cases, it's people in these women's lives who they love and trust who shame them into doing things that they don't want to do. Oftentimes, it's the man in the woman's life that shames her because he doesn't want to deal with the consequences of the outcome. But unfortunately for men, just because your penis works doesn't mean you get to control women's lives and what happens to them. You just don't. So personally, I am not really for late-term abortion because I think that's when the lines start to blur between fetus and baby. So I'm not for late-term abortion, but at the same time, I personally would still never shame a woman for getting a late-term abortion. I would just kind of wonder why she waited until the 3rd trimester when she had the first 6 months to do it. And honestly, what I can wrap my head around is most late-term abortions are very devastating because the mother actually wanted to have the baby, but she had to get the abortion due to health risks or threats of death or harm. So when you think about it like that, it changes the perspective. I'm sure there are women out there who have gotten a late-term abortion for no reason, but I just can't imagine that. I wouldn't shame those women. I would just wonder why. Why didn't you get an abortion before you started showing, you know? Anyway, that's just my thought on that. So I don't know if you guys know this, but my mother, the mother who raised me, could not give birth. I'm adopted. So I was raised by a woman who had 2 miscarriages prior to me and was completely unable to carry her own child. And guess what? She is absolutely pro-choice. Sometimes I hear pro-life people say things like, it's selfish to get an abortion when there are women out there that can't even get pregnant. And every single time a woman has an abortion, it's basically just rubbing it in the faces of infertile women that they are infertile and can't have babies. And I asked my mother, how do you feel about this? What do you think? And she told me she's absolutely pro-choice. She's always been pro-choice. And her own individual experience of being infertile has absolutely nothing to do with any other woman's life whatsoever. And whether you can have babies or not has nothing to do with any other women's lives. And I'm sure there are some women who can't have children that are absolutely disgusted by the thought of abortion. I'm sure there are some women like that. But that's a bitterness that those women have to deal with on their own. Just because some women are resentful that they can't have children doesn't mean we should make abortion illegal. Like, sorry, because you have bitterness and resentment, we don't have access to a procedure that we might need. That doesn't make any sense to me. Also, I don't know if this sounds harsh, sorry if it comes off that way, but if you're an infertile woman who is so pro-life, you should be adopting or you should be fostering children. Why? Because that's a perfect way to show off how pro-life you really are. Don't shame women for getting abortions. Instead, do your part to be pro-life. You see how this works? I don't think it's that hard to understand, but I see people who are so wrapped up in being pro-life, which is really pro-fetus, that they actually don't see how anti-life they really are out in the real world. So if you're an infertile woman who is bitter and resentful at women who decide to get an abortion, that's your cross to bear, and maybe you should adopt and take your own advice and be pro-life. Oh, and that's another really, really important thing. You can be pro-life for yourself, in your own life and with your own family, without taking away other women's autonomy by outlawing a procedure that is actually in demand. Because it's true, abortion is in demand for a plethora of insane reasons, so many that we could never count them all, but it's in demand. So you can definitely be pro-life for yourself. And you know what? I'm pro-life for myself. I would never, ever, ever get an abortion. And I don't want to share this part of my life on the internet, but I have my own personal reasons for why I would never get an abortion. They're very valid reasons. And when I think about my own life and my own past, these reasons still hurt and they bring up emotions. So I personally would absolutely never get an abortion. Even if I got pregnant right now or tomorrow, I would make it work. And I'm not going to throw that burden on every other woman in America. Are you kidding me? I guess I'm just not that arrogant. But just because I am pro-life for myself doesn't give me a right to dictate that for other women at all. So I don't know. I just never got that. I'm very pro-life for myself. You can ask anybody. I would never get an abortion, never. But me not getting an abortion has nothing to do with anybody else. So, you know, the expression, I'm coloring my own picture, so I'll just stay out of everyone else's coloring book, that type of thing. We just don't need any more at-home abortions. We don't need any more lives ruined. We don't need any more people poverty-stricken. We just don't need it. We don't need any more children thrown carelessly into an adoption center. We don't need it. What we need is autonomy. What we need is the ability to make decisions for our own lives, meaningful decisions for our own life. And we as a human race, especially pro-lifers, we need to redirect our focus to the people that are already here instead of shaming people for aborting something that isn't even born yet. So we need to redirect our focus to the lives that are here in front of us. And if you rewind this video, I gave ample ways to exercise your right to being pro-life that have absolutely nothing to do with abortion whatsoever. Also, it might be kind of helpful for pro-life people to think about women who have already gotten abortions, whether that be years ago or decades ago. You know, whether that was their own personal choice or whether they were forced or manipulated into it, just think about how hard it must be to hear all of this very harsh discussion about abortion all the time. So whatever side you are more loyal to, remember to be as gentle as possible when talking about this topic. I know it's impossible to actually be gentle because this isn't a gentle thing, but you don't have to cause unnecessary suffering, and you certainly don't have to dehumanize women who have gotten abortions, which isn't a very pro-life thing to do anyway, and I see it happen all the time. Calling a woman a murderer for getting an abortion is very dehumanizing. It's an extreme oversimplification, And you have no idea the emotional toll and burden that you are putting on top of that woman, which is not very pro-life, because if you're pro-life, whose life do you care about? All lives, including that woman who got an abortion or is planning on getting an abortion. And the way you can respect her life is by understanding that she knows her life better than you do. She knows her circumstances better than you do. She has her own autonomy, and she is allowed to take the most meaningful path. And if the most meaningful path in her own life is abortion, she is allowed to do that. And she shouldn't have to feel any extra guilt put on her by some stranger who has an agenda. And I think that's another key difference between pro-life and pro-choice. With pro-life, there's an agenda. With pro-choice, the only agenda is autonomy. That's it. That doesn't really seem like an agenda to me. That just sounds like a human rights issue or a women's rights issue. Okay, so in closing, I want to mention a quote I found when I was looking online at some civil discourse about abortion. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. Mary Rose Samaria. I'm gonna link her article down below. She is pro-life, and I really liked her article. I certainly did not agree with everything. Certainly not. But I agreed with some, and overall I liked the article, so I'll link it down below for anybody that's pro-choice that wants to read a different perspective, or for anybody that's pro-life that wants to read the same perspective, or anybody that's not sure who wants another side to things other than the side I'm presenting. I'm going to link it. But the quote that I really thought was interesting, she says, "Here are my views. I am against both rape and abortion for the same reason, and that is because I don't think it should be lawful to do whatever I want or to cause harm to someone else's body without their consent, whether they are conscious of it or not." Right? When I read that, I just thought, wow, that's almost brilliant. Wow. So it made my brain do that thing where every particle in your brain is like searching for some flaw to pick out in that other person's statement so that you can be right again and so that your viewpoint can come back out on top. So I spent about 10 minutes with my brain like, wow. And then I realized this woman, her heart is very clearly in the right place. She doesn't want to cause harm to another human being without their consent. By outlawing abortion, you would still be causing people harm without their consent, just in a very different way. But by outlawing abortion and making abortion completely illegal, what you actually are doing is presenting ample opportunities for harm and suffering in that woman's life. In a not so roundabout way, by making abortion illegal, you would be doing a different version of what you don't want to do. You would be actively harming people. You would be actively harming families. And you would be taking away women's autonomy, which is harmful all on its own. So I can see how this could get into kind of a vicious cycle type of situation. But in my experience, anytime something turns into a vicious cycle, it's because people are not asking the right questions, not because it's actually a dead end. So let's talk about this. Let's actually talk about this openly, honestly, share our experience, share our opinions, share our thoughts. Don't intrude on anybody's personal information or anything like that, but if you have a story that didn't specifically happen to you that you want to share, do that. Just make sure you change names and just respect people's privacy on this topic, because since it is still so stigmatized in a way taboo, we don't want to just be like throwing people's crap out there. But at the same time, a dialogue does need to be opened. So let's find respectful ways to share our stories and opinions and etc. on this. And yeah, I think that's all I got. My notes are, I have 5 pages of notes here for you guys. I spent all morning on this. Yeah, I hope I didn't forget anything. You know, if I did forget anything, I'll add it down in the description. I'll just type it out. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being here. If you want to share your stories, please do. I really, really want you to. Let's just make America, at the very least, a little bit safer for women, if not physically, because I know that's still far off. Let's make it safe for women to share their experiences without being judged so harshly or not believed or talked over. Let's take this time to urge America in the direction of making women safer. And I think opening up a dialogue on abortion is a good way to do that, because the stigma around abortion makes plenty of women feel very unsafe. Okay, so like I said, I think that's all. Thank you again. Comment, like, subscribe, share, rewatch, whatever. And I will see you guys next time I make a video. Maybe next time it won't be so heavy. Maybe it will. You never know with me. All right, subscribe. Bye.